Getting underway shortly.
Couple of things, team. We will be starting this session on time. And in case you're wondering, yes, it will be recorded. And that recording will be made available in the next 72 hours. I'll explain the modalities of that a little later. My name is Peter. My two presenters today would be Don and Raquel. They'll both introduce themselves in a short moment. Thanks for coming in and joining us early. Always appreciate it. Got a good number of people that are registered. It might be 500 plus. That number keeps rising. I do know you're in for a treat. This is a great webinar. I've only seen portions of it, but I'm absolutely looking forward to hearing Don and Raquel talk about storytelling and elevating your leadership presence. If you are in the room and hearing my voice, just want you to think about locating the questions and answers pod. In this setup, in a webinar setup, we don't have the chat, which you may be used to in your own instance of Zoom. What we have as a replacement is an opportunity to type short sentences, thoughts in the Q&A pod. So if you want to test that, open your Q&A pod like Ken has done. Thank you so much. Testing, Jameson, gotcha, loud and clear. Thank you so much. You're seeing those, Don, Raquel, I hope. There you go. Thank you, everyone. Cindy, thank you. I won't be mentioning all the names. They're coming in too fast and furious, but Carolyn, thank you so much. Leslie, Claire, thank you, everyone, again, for coming in early and testing that modality. Winnipeg, Canada. Yeah, I'm from Winnipeg. I'm from Montreal myself. I'm the co-host. I'm not presenting today, but I will say I'm from Montreal, Canada, and my name is Peter Palmer. We'll be starting the recording in about 30 seconds or so. Thank you so much. Josh, I got it. Testing. Perfect. Phil, I see that. Allison. Marvelous. Well, tell you what, you are in for a treat today. We're just about to start the recording. It's just rolled over the top of the hour, and I invite you to welcome my two presenters, Don and Raquel. Over to you, team.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Peter, and welcome, team. Thank you for being here today for Storytelling for Impact. My name is Don Workington. I'm the Vice President of Training with one of our Dale Carnegie offices here in New Jersey, and excited to be with you. I've been in training in terms of leadership and high-impact presentation skills for the better part of 20 years, and look forward to sharing the power of storytelling with all of you. And I'm joined by
Raquel Armendariz. I am located in Atlanta area. I'm the VP of Customer Experience for Dale Carnegie Southeast. So we cover Atlanta, Nashville, Orlando, part of Virginia, but I am originally from Juarez, Mexico. Being in Dale Carnegie for 20 years, and so excited to be here with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Raquel. So when I think of storytelling for impact, I'm reminded of a client that we worked with a few years ago, and this was a global procurement company. And the CEO of this organization was kicking off a leadership program. And I remembered vividly, he was talking about the importance of happiness and why he wanted his team to be happy, not just at work, but happy in life. And one of the specific parts of his message that was so powerful was he told the story of his young daughter who approached him one day and said, "Daddy, you need to watch more Tom and Jerry and less CNN." And the whole room laughed and he lit up. And in that moment, what I witnessed was people looked at that leader differently. There was more fondness for him as a person. He connected with his people. That story, and especially that personal story, really helped to elevate his leadership presence. And that's what we're going to focus on today, the power of these stories. So one of the things that we're going to talk about as we go through this, and today's webinar, our goal here is to make this as interactive as we possibly can, despite the fact we're all virtual. We're going to really discover, I should even say rediscover, for many of us, the power of stories. We're going to challenge you throughout this to think about a leadership impact story that you can share. And our goal is to make sure that we have fun. Now, if we think about it, from the beginning of time, people have used stories to teach and to inspire others. And throughout our lives, we have all heard thousands of stories, both within our families as well as within our professional life, that have provided us with guidance and wisdom. And the reality is we've got these stories at our disposal. We will encourage you to think about some, and we'll challenge you to use the opportunity to tell stories to connect with others. And so where we're going to go today, Raquel will share a little bit of a background about who we are, and then where we're going to go today. Raquel.
Yeah, talking about stories, what is the Dale Carnegie stories? Well, we were founded in 1912 by Dale Carnegie as a public speaking program. And now we are over 80 countries. We facilitate our programs in more than 25 languages, more than 9 million graduates. And maybe you have heard about our most famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. That, by the way, is full of stories. Innovation is in our DNA. Just back in 2020, when COVID forced us to move our work environment to a different level, our facilitation was more than 90% face-to-face, and then suddenly we could not meet face-to-face. So in less than 2 months, we were able to certify more than 2,000 trainers to be able to facilitate in online platforms. And now we are offering the 2 modalities to all of our clients. The objectives of today, we have 4 main objectives. We are talking about storytelling. So how can we use them to engage and influence our team? Also, we are going to see how can we proper plan how to tell those stories by creating an opening, delivering compelling message, and creating or develop a close with impact. Those last words that people will listen, how can they remember them forever? Let's elevate our leadership presence by highlighting our expertise and identify storytelling best practices that can help leaders to connect with others.
And along that theme of connecting with others, we believe that great leaders connect with others. And one of the ways they do that is through telling stories. And so we're going to take a minute and encourage all of us to think about what is a value or even some of the values that you believe are critical for leaders to have in order to be successful. And when you think about that value, think about, is there a story that you could tell that emphasizes that point? As an example, one of the values that I hold dear as a leader is that I want to make sure that I'm a kind of a leader who respects my people, and that my people know that I respect them and treat them with care and concern. And one of the stories that really reminds me of why I feel so strong about that is a story about my father. My father, for 40 plus years, has ran hospital laboratories. And in fact, at 84 years old, he still runs several hospital labs. And we always tell him, Dad, you got to retire. But he loves working with people. And so when I was in college, I used to go on Friday nights and help my father with paperwork and other things. And I'll never forget one Friday when I got to the hospital and his admin pulled me aside and said, I want to tell you something about your dad. And of course, being a young 19, 20-year-old, I'm like, I want to hear, what about my father? And I'll never forget what she said. And she talked about how he treated people in the laboratory with respect. And then the last thing she said to me, she said, the reality is not all the other doctors who work here treat us that way. That made a huge impression on me. And I remember thinking at that time, someday when I'm a leader, I want people to say that about me. And so many times these values, there's reasons why we hold them so dear. Raquel, I know you have a value that's important to you as well.
Absolutely. I learned from my dad also the power of honesty and integrity. When I was about 13 years old, I stopped at his office. He was the head of the police department in the little town we were living near to Mexico. And I witnessed how he refused to receive money to break the rules for their corporation. And when I asked him, why did you do that, Dad? I mean, we need the money. And I remember his answer. He said, Raquel, I'm always complaining about people not being honest. And I want a better country for my family. And I need to start showing the example. And I remember, I still is in my head. And I'm a person that I want to be recognized as for my honesty and integrity. And I like also people to be honest with me.
That's awesome. And so what we thought we'd do for today's webinar is encourage you to think about a story that might illustrate a value that you hold dear. And let's see, if you had to capture your story as a title of a movie or a book, what would it be? Like, as an example, mine might be The Day I Visited My Dad at Work. Very simple. Raquel, what might be the title of your story? Just an off-the-cuff thing here.
The day my dad showed me honesty.
Oh, wow. So we're going to encourage you in the Q&A to interact with us. And so, Peter, if you want to let folks know how that will happen.
You bet. In this mode, Q&A would be a tab at the bottom of your screen. You should see it there. It says Q&A with a little question mark in it. And many of you are typing responses like good morning, and those are being dismissed. There we go. Danielle just shared one. Earthquake. Earthquake.
Oh, wow.
As I'm thinking that's a value, right? Let's see some others.
Yeah, so you thought like a title of a story that illustrates the value. What might the title be?
Sonia says resilience.
Awesome. Oh, I love
Chef
it.
picture, humility. Those are values.
Yeah,
Integrity.
yeah.
Absolutely. Legacy. Let it go. Gary.
Let it go. That's a
I
great
loved
song.
it. Grit. There's some titles that capture attention. Thank you so much. Impact. Back to you, Don.
Awesome. Thank you. And that's the goal for us. And we can think of these stories. It makes it even more powerful. And so we're going to go on to our next slide here. And so we're going to challenge you now to think about what are some stories that have had an impact on you. And we pulled this slide up just to show you there's many places stories come from, right? Books. We all have personal stories and business stories, film, documentary. One for me that I'll never forget. I know many of us are familiar with the Ring doorbell company. If anyone is not, they are video doorbells where you can see people at your door. I love technology, and so I was an early adopter of the Ring doorbell. And I remembered back in their early days, on the side of the box, they had the email address of the founder, Jamie Siminoff, and it said, "Email me with any questions." I said, "What the heck? Let's email him and see if he responds. I had a question." And I was shocked. A couple days later, he personally responded. At least I'm pretty sure it was him, because it didn't look like something that someone was told to respond. It was a very personal note, and like that made a huge impression on me. Fast forward a decade later, Ring has now grown to be a massive organization. I had another question on a product. I dug back through my emails. I said, let me see if I'll get a response again. Now that there's this huge billion-dollar company, I emailed Jamie again, and sure enough, I'm almost certain he responded. It was about a particular product request. That made a huge impact on me as a leader, that we want to keep in touch with our clients and respond to people. That really was something for me that made a huge impact. Raquel, how about, is there one of these examples that really has stuck with you?
Well, for me, it's actually a short video that it was part of a documentary. This is a Mexican neurosurgeon that I saw how he was explaining in a very simple way how our brain works. So anybody, it doesn't matter your expertise about neuroscience, could understand what he was talking. And one of the things that I learned, it created a greater impact, is how can we control when we are feeling especially angry and about to do something bad, because we are not, and he explains, we are not thinking. So he explained about how to control that in a very simple way. I took it as a lesson. And in Dale Carnegie, we have several sessions where we talk about how to deal with stress, how to control our attitude. And until right now, I'm giving that story to all of the participants. And I even say the name of this neurosurgeon. I shared the video, that because it was something that created a great impact on me, but the way that and actually he was telling with stories, how to understand our brain and how to understand how to control ourselves. So it created a great impact on me.
That's powerful, Raquel. And these stories, they impact us and we remember them. And even just in that story, you jog my memory of a client who shared an example of where he lost 70 pounds in less than a year. And I had wanted to lose 20 pounds for years and never did that. And I remember after I heard that talk, it absolutely inspired me to go on a weight loss journey and a health journey. But it was so profound when he shared that experience. And the amazing story of this is not only did he lose that much weight in a year, but he wound up training for a triathlon and actually completed a triathlon. I had done one earlier in my life. And the point is that story was so powerful and inspired me. And so no doubt many of us have heard stories that have inspired us. And so what we're going to shift gears now into talking about is thinking about our organizations, our companies. And so Raquel, if you want to get us thinking in that direction, go ahead.
That's right, because sometimes leaders and companies, they can actually take advantage of using stories in their personal stories, like internal or even external stories. Talking about internal stories, I have the opportunity to work with a company here in Tennessee. This is called Tennessee Valley Authority. And one of the things that they do, they have this strong commitment to develop their team members, and they create those weeks of development. And it's a whole week where they put a group of leaders and they have that process of several workshops and so on. But they start day number one, showing a video of the CEO speaking about TVA, the history of the company, all the good things that they have done for the community. And then they show a lot of the things that they do internally in the organization, and you can see the actual employees over there. It was so funny because the first time that I saw that video, one of the persons that had a major role in that video was there taking the class with me. And it was amazing how we could see those faces feeling proud because they felt connected with those stories. Talking about the external stories, I mean, how many times have we seen companies in their website that they put testimonials from their customers, from their clients? That's using the other people's stories, external stories, to engage not only the employees but also possible customers.
And you made me think about, Raquel, we do a lot of work with pharmaceutical organizations here in New Jersey. And I know many of my pharma clients, they will have images and brief statements. It's not a full-on story, but by seeing the image of the patient and then briefly who they are, in a sense, it's making it more personal, beyond just numbers and statistics. And there's an interesting, I'll share this with you. There's a wonderful book, and it's called Made to Stick. And it talks about how do we make ideas stick in business. And one of the sections talked about the power of stories, and especially the power of stories with emotion. And they referenced a particular university that had done a test to see would facts and figures inspire people or would stories. And so they wrote 2 letters to look to seek money to raise funds for children who were starving in Africa. And one of the letters had all of the facts and the statistics. And they sent out that letter and then they tracked the donations. But the second letter told the story of Rokia, a 7-year-old girl from Mali. And they sent that letter out. And they tracked to see which one brought in more money. And I can imagine you probably realized the one that brought in more money was the story of Rokia, that 7-year-old girl from Mali. And the point is that people remember stories and it makes it more personal. And so there's tremendous power in this. So Raquel, let's get us thinking about some stories in our organization.
Yes, those stories, thinking about what people are saying about also their leaders in organizations based on what they do. I remember working with a company back there in Mexico, and when the plant manager, it was a manufacturing facility. My background is I'm an electrical engineer. I was working with a lot of manufacturing, and with this specific company, when this person took the plant manager role, that facility was the lowest in regarding numbers around the world in their organization. And he took it serious. He took the commitment of learning the name of every one of their employees. And there were more than 1,000 employees. And he took the challenge. Every single day, he went down to the manufacturing shop floor and spoke with 5 people at the time. It took him like long, but anyway, at the end of, I think, 1.5 years, he was able to recall everybody's names, and he was actually talking with them using their names, talking about their personal stories and so on and so on. Well, long story short, few years after that event, we knew about that, but I had the opportunity to go and talk and work with a specific area in that plan, in that facility. And when I talk about him, all the people that I was working with, they smiled and they were like, yeah, that's right. He is amazing. Every time that he comes here, he talks to us. It's a connection. We feel proud. We feel engaged with him. And one of the ladies said, I can do whatever he asked me to do because he is the best leader I can work for. So yeah, I mean, that story shows how we can go and connect with them in a personal level.
Wow, that's awesome, Raquel. Stories are powerful, as we can see. And so earlier in my career, I spent some time with a very large, a global cosmetic organization. And I worked both at our corporate office as well as some of our plants. And one of the legendary stories about one of our leaders who was so powerful, we also did some contract manufacturing. And so I was not there for this experience, but it was told to me by our employees. And evidently, some of the folks that we were doing work for, they weren't happy with what was happening. And at this very, very large meeting, but the way that I heard the story was they were attacking our employees and really going after them. And one of our senior executives stopped this from happening professionally and said to the client, if you're displeased with what we're doing, please do not be disrespectful to my employees. I will not tolerate that. If there's something really bad, you come see me. He basically defended our employees from a very irate customer. And it was one of those legendary stories that really spoke to the power of that leader to treat people with respect. And he was one of our favored leaders. I will never forget when he went to move on to another role. People in our company were in tears because they were sorry to see him go. But it was a legendary story where he really looked out for employees. And so our thought on this slide here is to get you to thinking about what are some of the leadership stories that are told in your organization. And one of our themes today for engagement is we're going to try to get you interacting in the Q&A. And so our thought is we can't drop an entire story into Q&A, but we're going to go back to this concept of if you had to turn your story into the title of a movie, what would it be? And we're going to pause for a moment and encourage folks in the Q&A to drop in what might be the title of a story that speaks about leaders. Mine might be the day the senior leader, I don't know, it's going to be the day the senior leader corrected the customer. It might be my title, as an example.
There we go. Got the first one in. Amanda says, come for a job, stay for a career. There's a headline. Rags to riches, an anonymous attendee.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah, the garage man and pencil maker. That, Bob, you got my attention there.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. The good, the bad, and the ugly, Frank. Thank you.
Whoa, that sounds fun.
Lots and lots of them here. The magic
I'm sure a lot
of
of coming
change. A flood isn't going to stop us. Oh my gosh, these stories would really do it. And it's interesting, Don, the headline sets the tone.
Absolutely.
You haven't even got the story built yet, but you know what you need to put in. If walk in others' shoes from Enrique, he would have to tell a story around that. Back to you.
And one thing we often do in many of our training programs is we will have people tell stories. And we often use this technique before the story comes. We have them tell the title. And you'll see many times like people like, oh my gosh, that sounds so exciting. They want to hear. And so there's absolutely an art to telling stories. And we're certainly going to share some of that with you as we go through today. So there's lots of ways, right, that we can use stories. Certainly for us, when we present, there's so many opportunities. Early in my career, when I worked in that manufacturing role, I also was involved in health and safety. And we would often tell stories, both of when health and safety went well, but many times the powerful stories were the warning ones when things didn't go well. But those stories are what are so memorable. One of the more vivid stories that I've heard probably in the last decade was from one of our clients. And the woman spoke about a particular Saturday morning in her house. And she started out and said she had 3 kids and she's getting breakfast for her 3 kids. But she said this particular Saturday, she was watching her neighbor's 3 kids. So she goes, I've got 6 kids in my kitchen and I'm trying to get breakfast together. And she said at one point, her neighbor's, I think he was 7 or 8 years old, her neighbor's young son asked her if she could make him eggs. And she said, honey, I'd love to make you eggs, but I got so much going on. So very quickly, she says, a few minutes later, she looks over to the stove and she goes, what she saw was her neighbor's son cooking his own eggs. And then she drops this line. She says, and I looked down and realized I was buttering my 12-year-old son's toast. And the whole room erupted in laughter, and she laughed. And then she said this. She said, how many of us at work are buttering other people's toast? In other words, how many of us are doing things for others that they should be doing themselves? It was such a masterful transition of that personal story and connecting it back to business. And so for me, that's certainly one that stood out as being incredibly powerful. Raquel, do you have one on your end that you can think of?
Yes, one of the times that it was the first course that I was facilitating in Tennessee when I moved. And it was about leadership stories, right? And this guy came talking about how his commitment was with his wife. And I was like, what? I mean, this is about your company. It's about a leadership story. Why are you talking about your wife? Well, he was saying that at the end of the story, he said that it was a tough time for them. They had a young kid. His wife was not happy. He was coming late every day. And then on the top of them, he was drinking a lot. And it was not a single day that he was not drinking beer. And his wife was not happy about it. So he made a commitment to change that and fix that relationship in his family. And by doing that, he said, I was able to focus more in my job and see what was happening also in my job, because I was so distracted, not only in my personal life, but in my professional life. And once I was focused here, I could guide my team. And at the end, he said, I was not able just to save my marriage, but also to save my team. And now we're recognized as more productive team. Long story short, 2 years after that, he was promoted. He was happy. He was still married with another kid. So those personal stories of how they can be connected and take the best out of it and keep working. I mean, learning and keep working.
Yeah, and that's the art. And especially Dale Carnegie says that when we tell stories, we've earned the right to tell. It gives us confidence. And one of the reasons we're bringing this up is for some people, presenting can be something that causes stress. And Raquel and I and the Dale Carnegie organization teach a number of programs that help people to overcome some of that fear of public speaking. And one of the techniques that we will often teach is to use stories that you've experienced. And we have thousands of stories, again, personally and professionally. And when we tell those stories, we've earned the right to tell. It gives us tremendous confidence. I'll give one last fun example of a client who took one of our high impact presentation programs and was very nervous when presenting and very sort of a monotonous style. And during one portion on day 2, he began to tell a story about a scuba diving trip he went on. And he started to add in some of the details and what he saw and what was under the water. And all of a sudden, it became this incredibly engaging story. And so when we can use these stories, it truly helps to give us some confidence. So I know many of us also present. And for anyone who presents, you've no doubt had some technology challenges. So we're going to share a brief video with you of someone we've all heard of, Mr. Steve Jobs. And he was delivering a presentation. And all of a sudden, the technology didn't work. And let's take a look at how he used storytelling to be even more impactful. And here we go.
Clicker is not working. All right. They're scrambling backstage right now. You know, when I was in high school, Steve Wozniak and I, mostly Steve, made this little device called a TV jammer. And it was this little oscillator that would put out frequencies that would screw up the TV. And Woz would have it in his pocket, and we'd go into like a dorm at Berkeley where he was going to school, and a bunch of folks would be watching like Star Trek, and he'd screw up the TV, and somebody'd go up to fix it, and just as they had their foot off the ground, he'd turn it back on. And if they put their foot back on the ground, he'd screw up the TV again. And within 5 minutes, he'd have somebody like this for the rest of the Star Trek episode. Okay, so maybe it's working now. Maybe they're going to have to click them for me. So, game consoles.
And so the point of that story, so clearly, that was something he lived, he experienced. I'll say it again, that he earned the right to share. And when we can tell those stories, it makes it easier for them to come to life. You'll see a little later in today's presentation, we'll have a quote from Dale Carnegie. And I'm going to bring it up now because it's so powerful when it comes to storytelling. And Dale Carnegie once said, "Let the audience see what you saw, hear what you heard, and feel what you felt." And when we bring those elements into a story, it makes it incredibly powerful. Many of us also have to have people remember content. I know in my prior role, I did a lot of training around something called good manufacturing practices. I also worked for a facility that had various quality certifications, and we had to get people to remember content. And stories are also one of the ways that we can help people remember content. And this next video gives us a couple of quick tips to really see the power of stories, especially when dealing with statistics and numbers. So here goes.
It's 1978, and Joanna Lundstrom is 12 years old. It's the first day of 6th grade gym class, and she's standing in line waiting in the gymnasium to be weighed. In the front of the line, Miss March, her gym instructor, calls out the names of each of the girls. Joanna wonders if Miss March's voice will be as loud and clear as her fingers are slow as she calls out her weight. And her heart sinks with the certainty that it will. Does anybody remember the gym teacher's name? And what was Joanna so worried about? Do people remember what she was worried about? Does anybody remember what Joanna weighed in the 3rd grade? 78. And where was it taking place?
Wasn't that cool? Speaks to the power of stories. So we're going to talk about what makes a good story. What are some of the components that we can put into it? And as I mentioned a few moments ago, it's adding in some of those details, bringing that story to life. What did you see? What did you hear? How did you feel? And believe it or not, there truly is an emotional element, or there can be an emotional element in storytelling. There was another study that was done, and it talked about 2 different stories. And one of them just talked about a father who was spending time with his son. But the other one expanded on it. It added an emotional element. And it talked about the son was struggling with a form of cancer and the father's challenges in dealing with his son. And what they found was that in that second story that had more of that emotion, they said it actually triggered more of the trusting, for people to trust that person even more. And so when that story has an emotional element, a real element to it, it really becomes incredibly compelling. And so there's a lot of elements that can go into a story. These are some of the guidelines. And one of the points that I make, many of these things happen naturally. when we get that right story that speaks to us, because we can bring that story to life as we share it. That story that I mentioned about the woman taking care of her kids and her neighbor's kids, when she told that story, she naturally did many of these things because the nature of that story allowed that to happen. And so, but these are some of the things we've got to bring to a story if we want to connect with our audience. We're going to talk about this for a little bit, and Raquel's going to share with us some of the powerful tips and some of the ways that we can really plan an opening to immediately grab people's
Absolutely.
attention. Raquel?
Absolutely. Dale Carnegie said the first 15 seconds are the most crucial in a presentation because it's when we can get people's attention or we can lose it. And if we lose their attention, it's going to be hard to get them back. But if we get them immediately, we have a higher chance that they can stay for the entire presentation. So, and believe me, starting a presentation saying something like, hey, good morning. Today we're going to talk about the percentage of the sales of the month. That's not an opening. I mean, how many times have we seen people opening a presentation doing that? We lost people. Now, some of the things that we can use, and we already talked about that, personal stories. When we start talking about those personal stories, we engage because they are engaging. We want to know more about it. We want to know more details. We are already there. Business stories also. Those are great, especially when we're trying to convince others about our organization and we present a successful business story. We are engaged. It's something that gets our attention. Historical story. Just today in the morning, it was so funny that I just opened my phone because I wanted to see my calendar. And then I opened one of my social media, social media is there. And one of the videos that came was bringing some historical data that got my attention. So suddenly I was watching a video of something historically because it got my attention immediately. Some facts, quotes, pictures, videos. We use videos here. You already saw them. They are great. Immediately get everybody's attention. Being dramatic. Here, it doesn't mean that we have to lie. It doesn't mean that we have to come up with fake data. It means how can we emphasize our words, our stories in a way that people understand, that people see it, done said before. Let your audience to see, to hear, to experience what you are saying. So that's dramatizing. And then that mystery statement, sometimes we open with something that creates that atmosphere is mysterious and we don't know where we want to go, but we want to know what is going on. And then at the end, we can also open with a question. Many times we get people's engagement by asking a question of, would you like to be able to sell more in the following 2 hours? That's a question that if it's to a salespeople, they may be like, yeah, tell me more about it. And then let's go with the information.
And what's so powerful about these, to me, it's that first line at the top of the slide. It's plan. Just think about it. So many times we spend so much time on our content and we just think we'll open with, hello, my name is Don and I'm here today to talk about this. And that's not wrong. Our belief is when we plan that opening, it's even more powerful. Here's a couple powerful ones that I will never forget. One of our clients, I'll just say in the defense contractor space, I'll keep it very generic. They actually wrote on a flip chart the number 30, and they asked the audience, who knows what this represents? And so immediately with that question, it got people involved. Then they made a powerful statement, and they said, that represents 30 seconds. And they said, that's how fast I can hack into one of our systems. And I remember, even though it was a training program, you heard people in the audience go, whoa. I even heard someone say, you need to share that with the admiral next week. Like, that got people's attention immediately. Another vivid one that stood out working with one of my pharmaceutical clients was there were a group of facilitators in front of the room, and they said, picture this, you're in the ER. These are the numbers you're starting to see. What does it represent? And within less than 10 seconds, same thing, they got people involved. I'll share one last dramatic one. And this was an interesting one. Someone's given a presentation and the next person came up and the next person turned the lights off in the room. And 5 seconds went by, 10 seconds went by. It was almost like to the point where it's uncomfortable. People are like, is something wrong? All of a sudden the lights came on and the speaker said this, that's how our customers feel when we don't get back in touch with them. It was one of those things that was so profoundly memorable. And so our point here is, yes, our content is really important, but it's also critically important to think about how do we open in a way that really gets people's attention. Those are a couple ones that really have stood out for me. From the chat, I believe Peter had some requests for us to go back one slide. I think there were a couple questions, Peter, if you want to field those, and we can.
Somebody may have missed one element or two.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of requests. Just one back to the
Go
best
back. There we go.
practices. Yeah.
Awesome.
And you can screen capture, if you want the information right now, just print screen. Done. I think you want to continue.
Oh, did anyone have a specific question on this, Peter, that we can address, or?
Oh, no, just what they wanted to see it. Somebody
capture
missed it.
slide.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
thanks so much.
Gotcha. So, and as we've said, many of these things should happen naturally when you get that right story. So just a friendly reminder, we early on talked about some of the values that we felt are important and asked you to think of some stories. So keep thinking of that, because we're going to get you planning a story in just a moment. We're big believers in Dale Carnegie. At the end of the day, whenever we present content and tell stories, we really have to make sure that we know our audience. And that can even dictate what types of stories that you're going to share with the audience. So Raquel's going to give us a few things to consider when we really think about our audience.
Absolutely. One of the things also that Dale Carnegie said is that you have to know 40 times more than your audience about your topic. So because of that, let's plan who's going to be more audience. So we have several things to consider here. For example, what is the goal of this presentation? What is my intention with this presentation? Am I informing? Am I entertaining? Am I presenting some facts? What is the thing? So what are the goals? But also, what are the goals for the audience? Why are they coming to listen to me? Do we know why are they there? So knowing that. Also the knowledge. What is the level of knowledge of the people that is attending to this presentation? So we have to have we have to make our investigation. One of the things that two of my trainers in my team, they do very, very well. Before they start any program, they go to see the attendance list. They see where they work, what are their roles in that organization, and they like to even investigate a little bit more. Maybe they go to their LinkedIn profile, they try to find more about them and try to find the level of knowledge and expertise. That goes to the next step. What is the expertise of the people that is listening to us? That way, we can choose the proper language, because if we do not align with them, believe me, they may feel disconnected. It happened, unfortunately, one time with a trainer that we sent to one organization, feeling he was a wonderful trainer. He's diligent in his preparation. Unfortunately, he did not do a very good job learning or understanding the expertise of the people. And this client complained because they felt that this trainer was not talking directly to them, that it was too generic. And this level of people, they were like the head of the organization, and they didn't feel connected. So yes, finding the level of expertise, the experience, what experience they have, also the biases in both ways. Sometimes we may have some biases and maybe they may have some biases. If we can find common ground. Just yesterday, this past 3 days, I was in a class at the Middle Tennessee State University in Tennessee, and I saw a participant that immediately I got a bias, and I didn't even want to talk with him because I have my bias, I gave myself the opportunity to go and dig deeper. And then I found out a lot of things very interesting about him that made me realize the way that I was communicating with him, it was not the right way. And I changed the way that I started communicating with him, and he immediately got more engaged. So also those biases, the needs that the audience have and what they want is also crucial. Made me to remember one time that we were helping an individual in another organization. She said, she came to one of our programs, said, I have a very important presentation to make in 2 weeks. And it's for the entire corporation. And it's a meeting that is every single year, but this time is my first time presenting the information. And I'm terrified. And we started asking those questions. Who are attending to the meeting? What is their level of expertise? What are they wanted to hear, et cetera, et cetera. So she created the whole plan of the audience. Based on that, we created the plan of how to talk with them. And I remember her answer was, we never done it this way. I know that nobody in the organization has done it this way. And then we said, well, this is a great opportunity for you to be the first one creating a greater impact. He took the challenge, he planned her presentation, he presented, and guess what? After that, everybody in the organization had to change the way that they presented, and they took her as an example just because she was diligent in her preparation of understanding who was the audience and what was the best way to talk with them.
Wow, that's awesome. And it's just such an important thing for all of us to, and there's times like you might have an idea who your audience is beforehand, and other times you might not. And so I think we have to have that ability to adapt and really to adjust those stories to the audience. I know one of the questions dropped into chat was about within technical presentations and where might those opportunities be? And it reminds me of years ago, we had a client that worked in a very high tech field. And I don't remember all the details of their technology, but what I will never forget was their technology was something that every single one of us had in our cell phones. I remember that's how they started their message, where they talked about this device in your hands, and then they linked it back to what they were working on and said, basically, what you see today working, we're behind the scenes making it happen. And so I think we have, it's a little bit more challenging at times with some topics, but we have to think, where might those stories be? And I often say, with technology especially, think, what is it that we want people to remember, right? How do we keep it simple for them? And in one of our presentation courses, we have a wonderful concept. We teach people to come up with analogies that make it easy for others to understand that technology. I know I have wonderful relatives, and one who comes to mind is my dear Aunt Betsy. And I love my Aunt Betsy, and we got her a tablet years ago. And the amazing thing was it really connected her to the world, and it really enhanced her life. And at times she'll struggle with the technology. And so what I try to do is to think of what analogies can I use to make it easier for her to understand that technology. And it's not always easy to do, but every now and then I get lucky when I'm trying to explain something complicated. And when we get that right analogy, it can make it easier for other people to do. And so that's just one of the techniques that we often teach is think about that analogy. How do we make it easy? And then how does it relate back to those people? So we did say that we would do our best, even though we're virtual, to keep this interactive. So we want to engage everyone in thinking about some stories that you can tell. And so we're going to do that next. And Raquel's going to walk us through how we're going to do this. And then both of us will give an example of a leadership presence story. Go ahead, Raquel.
Yes, so right now, if we think about everything we have seen in this workshop, all the information, we talk about how to open, how to present, how to prepare, how to think about our audience. And we even thought at the very beginning of something about our values, what story behind about that value that we treasure. So in a moment, think about what story illustrates the leadership lesson that you learn. So think about that. What is the value demonstrated there? So think about it. We can think back of that story that we told at the very, very beginning, and then let's include relevant details. Who was involved in the story? What was happening? When did that happen? Where were you? Why were you having that conversation? And imagine that this brief story is gonna be featured on television. Like if it's a short story that we can see on TV, how can we put it? What details do we have to do? So we are going to give you 2 minutes to think about that. And in the Q&A section, we will write down, as we have been doing it, what story comes to our mind. And if you want to put a little bit more detail, I've seen some of you putting some extra details there. You can even say it. Who was there with you? What did you learn out of the story? Where was happening? How long did that happen? And so on. But very important, tell us that story. Make us see what was happening and what was that value that was demonstrated. So Don, what is one example that you have about this?
I've been a big brother with big brothers and big sisters for 20 plus years, and I have two awesome little brothers. And one of the stories revolves around my younger little brother, who's now in his early 30s. He just got out of a 10-year stint in the U.S. Marine Corps. And a few years back, he was deployed to the embassy in the country of Mozambique. And I remember we would often talk. And one of the things he told me one day was they went to do volunteer work with some kids at a local orphanage. And I remember vividly, he said they wanted to do more with the kids. I said, well, why couldn't you do more exercises? He said the kids didn't even have shoes. And it made a big impact on him. And he grew up in a tough environment as a kid. And so what he decided to do was he wanted to raise money to purchase shoes for these kids in an orphanage. And what he did was he put it up on his I think his Instagram feed, and he had several images and several quotes. And within those images and those quotes and the story that I heard, he put it out to his social media following and said, I want to raise $1,000 to help purchase shoes for the kids. And literally within days, he hit his objective. And I'm convinced for a couple of reasons. One is those images and those stories, they resonated with people. They connected with people. And I remember that it was really quite funny because I was the one responsible for gathering the shoes, shipping them out. And it was like a huge production, but I was so eager to help him do it because I was so fired up and enthusiastic about this. And so the point of this story, he as a leader in the Marine Corps cares about people. And I really respect that because I told you about my father. I really respect leaders who care and treat others well. And it's been something I've been beyond proud of my little brother, the heart he has to help others. And I think good leaders, they help other people. And when you see them do that, it inspires others to step up. And so for me, that's an example of one story that stands out. Raquel, I know you've got one as well.
Yes, one of my trainers, one time that we were talking, I told him, I'm from Juarez, Mexico. It was years ago when I met him. And he was like, Juarez? I was there once. And I was like, really? He said, well, I just passed through Juarez because we went to a small town called Guadalupe. And I was like, what? You went to my hometown? Because that was my hometown. And I asked him, so what did you do there? He said, well, I'm part of an organization that we like to help others. And he was there because over there, there is a house for people, for kids, not necessarily without parents, but it's because their parents are too busy. And I mean, they put them in that house, they help them during the week and so on. It's a very nice community that has been there forever, since I remember, since I was a kid. And I asked him, so what did you do there? Well, I was helping them with the chores, I was helping them with the kids. But also he got touched because sometimes those kids didn't have like what we have here in the United States, that we give for granted, it's like we have them, everybody has to have them. And he said, over there, I found out that some of the kids, they never tried ice cream. They never had ice cream in the past. So one of the things that I and my wife, is what he said, took all the kids, we took them to the little square in the little town, and we just bought ice cream for everybody. They were so happy. They were so engaged. They came back to the house. They were happy. It was a happy moment for them. But then he came back to the United States with a purpose. And his purpose was, let's help these kids with more resources, with more money, with more clothes, shoes, and especially money for them to do those things, like going for an ice cream. Well, long story short, a few years after that, I went back there to my hometown. I told him. He sent a greeting card to the people running that house. And when I went to give that card, they immediately said, yes, we remember him and his wife. They were so kind with the kids. They were so engaged with the kids, and they really brought happiness to this group of people. And that is, I'm so proud to have one in my team, a leader that is so engaged with the community. And because of that, we are engaged with him. He is a servant leader. He always say it. And he's so engaging, not only with our participants, but with the community around our organization here in Atlanta.
And that's, as we share those stories, it really does help to elevate that leadership presence. You respect that person. Peter, do we have some headlines or titles dropped into the Q&A there?
Well, we've got lots of things
Sure,
going
we've
on.
got a lot of
By the
folks on
way,
it.
I'll respond that at the end of the session, we'll mention again that yes, the recording will be available. It's not available immediately after the session, but it will be available. So we got lots of that. We've got Deborah, for example. She made a value statement connecting with people. Thank you when she was 18. Details in the chat. Got lots of others. David B too says coming out of his comfort zone. So we got lots of headlines, and they're thinking obviously to get to this stage of typing a headline, they've got to have a story in mind on.
Awesome. And I'll share this with you, just a real quick one, and then we're gonna wrap up shortly, team. One of the reasons that storytelling is so powerful is that when we as leaders have opportunities to give presentations, one of the things we coach people on all the time is tell stories you've earned the right to tell. It's a powerful way for us to connect with others and really leverage that presence, and it can help to give us more confidence when we tell those stories that we've earned the right to tell. And so one of the things that we believe in Dale Carnegie, we are passionate about helping other people. And so we want to make sure that we ended this webinar with some of the ways that we can help organizations. So Peter, if you'd be willing to share a little bit of how we help organizations, and then Raquel is going to close us out with a powerful story in a moment.
Thank you so much, Don and Raquel, and everyone here, obviously. Now, there's a number of ways we can support you, and some of you are here purely for storytelling. Well, storytelling comes up in lots of shapes and sizes. Somebody asked a question, Don, is this available in a longer version? And you said, yeah, we do it in 2 hours and 3 hour format. That's one version available in your office. And I work as a facilitator online. We teach successful public speaking as an example in a 3 hour format. It's not quite the same content, but storytelling in many cases are part of public speaking. But there's sales training available if your organization is in business development or sales training, customer facing, customer service, and sales training. There's a number of ways. And it was mentioned earlier on that we do this in different modalities. Raquel mentioned that, yeah, we have trainers available in local offices around the globe in 85 countries around the world. We also run online sessions. So all of those offices have a capacity of running them in your language, whether it be native speaker, Portuguese, French, Italian. All of those are available, obviously, in English and French as well. Now, we have team programs, customer service programs. There's a number of ways we can do that. Now, just before we wrap, the recording of today's session will be available. There will be a representative from a local Dale Carnegie office that will be contacting you. And I'm going to say in the next 72 hours, because we're coming towards the end of the week. And so they'll be reaching out to you. And if you want a copy of the recording, it will be available. So watch for that. The communications from a local Dale Carnegie person in the next 72 hours. Back to you, Don.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. And that's our goal. We want to help others. And so what I will say, this workshop, we do often, I've delivered this in person dozens of times. And when we do it in person, the powerful thing is we actually have people craft stories and share them in small teams. And so it's a very powerful workshop to give people that skill to tell those stories. And so I figured since we're here for storytelling today, we're going to close out with an inspirational story. And so Raquel, I'll turn that over to you.
Yes. So this is how leaders can use the power of stories to engage their employees. I remember one time when I was still working in manufacturing, that was one of my first manufacturing jobs that I had. There was a time frame where everybody, we were having some thoughts of uncertainty because there were some rumors that the company was being bought by some other big organization. And, you know, everybody was gossiping, what is going to happen with us? Are they going to fire us? Are they going to change the way that we work, et cetera, et cetera? And it was a very tense and bad atmosphere. So the plant manager decided to put everybody together in a big meeting room. And he started saying, I know certainty is in the air. We don't know what is going to happen in the future. I've heard people gossiping. I've heard people feeling anxious about the future. But guess what? We can overcome all the challenges and we can always be better. And then he stopped talking and he showed a video. And we were like, what is happening now? because the video was about two musicians and one director. The musicians were fantastic. They were playing one by one only. One person playing, then quiet, and then the other person. And the director was making them to compete in a healthy way. That way that they were increasing, they were playing, they started very good, but the way that they finished, it was fantastic because of how the director was pushing them to do even better, to go extra. And at the end, it was a masterpiece. That song was so powerful, so beautiful, amazing. And then you could see the face of the two musicians, so proud of doing something even better of what they expected. When the video finished, the plant manager said, "We can always do things better. We need to have the right leadership. I'm here, your leader, and I want all of us to do better. You are also a leader. Go there and motivate your team members to do better, because we can prove it doesn't matter who is buying this organization, that we can do better. So go there and do better." And I remember everybody going out of the meeting room feeling proud about ourselves, but also feeling confident about whatever was coming to our future. So what I'm going to tell you is, use the power of storytelling. That way we can engage our team to do better.
Awesome. Thank you, Raquel. And so, Peter, we'll turn it to you to final closeout.
Well, thank you so much. Tell you what, I teach on a regular basis. Don and Raquel know that. I teach storytelling. I got to tell you, I took notes. I'm going to be using some of this material. You're both so masterful, Don and Raquel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To all of you that have invested your precious time, it's close to 60 minutes with us. Thank you so much. We recognize you have other choices to make, and you've decided to invest a part of possibly your lunch hour to be with us to hear these compelling stories and best practices on storytelling. Elevating your leadership presence is so required in today's workplace. Don and Raquel, thank you so much on behalf of the close to 1,000 attendees today.
Thank you, Peter.
Amazing job.
And thank you, team. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Tell more stories, and it will elevate your leadership presence. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Woohoo!
everybody.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Hey, the room will stay open, and the chat, Q&A chat, will remain active. So stick around if you do have questions. With a smaller group in the room, we can possibly answer them directly. Have yourself a wonderful end of week. Bye for now. We're seeing the number of participants go down,
Yeah, I have
but
it.
don't hesitate, please. If you have questions, let's see if there are some. Great session. Thank you, Juan. Got it. Outstanding. Patricia, Elizabeth. Thank you, Tony. Tatiana. What we can do is type your question in the chat. I'll see it immediately, and Raquel and Don can answer it. So could you please type that in the chat? Appreciate it, Phil. Not seeing any questions just yet, but there's still a few people in the room.
Yeah, we love questions. So if you have them,
Yeah.
please feel free
So
to ask them.
let's do this. John has a question. Tell us about additional storytelling training. And Don and Raquel, why don't you take that one, please?
Sure. I'd be happy to field that. We've delivered this workshop multiple times, and we've done it anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. We have other programs that have elements of storytelling that are longer. But typically when I've delivered this, one of the goals is we have people come up with stories. And we've done it custom. We always make sure that it's a story that's going to make sense for that business. I know one of the ones I work with some groups with, they want people to tell stories about branding themselves, right? What are some of their strengths they bring to the organization? We've had people tell stories of they need people to take action, and so we have them come up with custom stories. But we always work on that. In fact, one of our powerful programs is called High Impact Presentations, and that is a course where we coach people on speaking in front of audiences. And one of the techniques we use in there as well is for people to tell stories. So there's many of our programs where we build in this element of storytelling. So certainly if you want more information, you could reach out to one of the local offices and they'd be happy to share that with you.
Yes,
Marvelous.
and continuing with that, one of the questions that we have here, like, what is one of the ways not to feel intimidated by our audience faces? In that high impact presentation, we work a lot, I mean, practicing. And one of the things that we do, and it's a good practice, is like recording your presentations and every time you practice, because it doesn't matter what are the faces of them. If you are very prepared, you know what you want to say, that doesn't matter once you have everything in your head that you want to say.
Mhm. Now, a couple of things. We had Peyton had a question, just running through some of the steps. Don, you probably saw that come in.
I think it's an
Go
interesting. It says, I'll just read it for those that want to hear it. It says, what are some of the steps to a good storyline that should be in every tale? My first thought, I don't know that there's an absolute, but I think it's ideal if there's a personal element to it, if there's some enthusiasm to tell the story. Doesn't necessarily have to be humor, because not every story is humorous. For me, the big goal is, does that story impact the audience? And so that's often what I look for. I know when I do work with some of my clients, I will adapt my stories to that audience. I don't know if there's any one thing other than being genuine. I mean, that is in everything we do. It has to be genuine, sincere, and be real. Dale Carnegie said to become genuinely interested in other people. So that's my first thought. Raquel, do you want to field that? And then Peter, if you have an additional thought.
Thank
For
you.
me, the thoughts that I have, I mean, I started immediately with a story. Like every time that we start talking is starting with some actions. What was I doing? With whom I was talking with? What did I say? Where I was? All these things that starting with action, it creates that impact in the person that is listening to us. And then later on, we continue with more details and so on and so on and more background, but starting with some specific actions that we were doing that gets people's attention.
Marvelous. Thank you so much. We do have a question from Ryan. I can respond, Ryan, to the question about how long. You may have missed it. How long or short should they be? Depending on the purpose. If you've ever watched a TED Talk, there's a theme to a TED Talk, but in every case, whether it be TED Talks that you may have watched or TEDx Talks, they always wrap them at 18 minutes. But embedded in that 18 minutes may be 3 or 4 different stories. So my sweet spot is somewhere between 60 seconds and 2 minutes. Actually, at 2 minutes, people mentally start to check out. So that's the guideline that we've been following today.
Excellent. Do you have any additional questions, Peter?
Well, had Nick wanted to make us to make the distinction between business and business storytelling and maybe performance of storytelling, I know both of you can address that one.
Yeah, I think in business, again, it depends on the business. I know there are some businesses I work with that are very results oriented and metric oriented. And so in that case, I might tell a story that refers to that. There's some places I work with, they want to hear more stories from the heart. And so I don't know that, again, there's any absolute. I go back to knowing your audience, to me, is what's absolutely critical as we think about the stories. Additional thoughts on that, Raquel or Peter?
I'm sorry, I'm answering to somebody from TVA because the question is, how is the best way to engage federal agencies with Dale Carnegie?
Yes.
Aaron, we are already working with you, Dale Carnegie of Southeast, our representative in Nashville, Tennessee. We have somebody in Chattanooga that's actually taking care of TVA, so we can connect. And you can even actually go and talk with the Human Resources Department at TVA and talk about Dale Carnegie. We already have a relationship.
I also, when I talk about storytelling, like in business, and one of the reasons I say personal stories, I don't necessarily mean just personal life. We also have loads of stories that have happened to us as individuals in the business world. And so really, when I look at some of those, there's stories we can pull from in many different areas. And so when we often talk about good leaders, we will give examples of good leaders that we've seen in the business world, but also in the personal world, because people can relate to both of them. So I think
So
we're going to
important.
be closing out in a minute or so, Peter. So why don't we see if we have an additional question or two? And if not, certainly feel free to reach out to your local Dale Carnegie office. They will be more than happy to field any additional questions. So Peter?
Thank you so much to both of you. Anyone who's stuck around, we know you're interested, and thank you for typing those questions. Keep in mind, our goal is to support you in any way we can, whether it be locally in your franchise, in your local office, Dale Carnegie office around the globe in 85 countries. We don't know where you're located now, but that is our goal. Watch for someone from your local office to communicate the details of the availability of the recording. Our goal is to support, again, Don and Raquel. Thank you so much. Great webinar. Cheers, everyone. Have yourself a wonderful end of